Hey everyone and welcome back. And for anybody who's new, I'm an independent app developer working on version 2 of Ticker. Ticker is my iOS app written with SwiftUI. Ticker is an activity tracker that helps you reach your time-based goals. Over the last week or so, I've fixed the timer bug, improved data retention, and vastly improved the user experience of starting an activity. Let's see how I accomplished all of that. Currently, dismissing the save activity sheet is not handled properly. Instead of resuming the timer, it's just stuck on the time it was when you pressed the stop button. Luckily, I already have a pause timer functionality, so I just need to pause the timer when the stop button is pressed, and then add an on-dismiss closure to the sheet for the save activity to resume that timer. But I only want to resume the timer if the activity was not saved. So I have the activity status that I can look at to see if that activity was saved or not on the save activity sheet. I've designed Ticker to preserve as much data as possible in the event of a close or crash of the app. For example, when an activity starts, it is saved immediately with a duration of 0 seconds. Then, at the beginning of every minute of the timer, that activity is saved again with an updated duration. Unfortunately, for these saves to actually happen, the app has to be open at the beginning of every minute because that's when those saves actually happen. And since Ticker is an app that's largely run in the background, I've noticed that these saves don't actually ever happen. And if the app stops, the activity is saved, but it's with that duration of 0 seconds. I don't believe there's anything necessarily wrong with this implementation, but I think there's just one additional save that's missing. I think a use case of Ticker is to start an activity, set your phone down, and then get lost in the activity for however long. Then you go back to Ticker and pick it up and see how long your activity has been running. So I monitored the scene phase, and when it's moved back into active, I'm saving the activity again with the updated duration. Now, this still has the possibility of losing that duration if Ticker's never opened again after the activity started, but I can only do so much, and this gives me an more accurate duration in most cases if something does go wrong. There's a card on the Trello board that mentions adding a category to group the activities together. After some consideration, I decided that's not really necessary. Instead, what I really want is to be able to make it easier to create multiple activities with the same name. Also, I don't love the UX of entering the name on the activity, so I want to address that as well. I decided to give the user suggestions for the name on the Start Activity screen. Those names would come from the previous activities that had already been saved. I had to research how to achieve this because it wasn't immediately intuitive to me. So I went and asked ChatGPT and it gave me some good suggestions. It's a two-step process of fetching the suggestions and then displaying them to the user. Since I'm using core data for this app, I used NSFetchRequest to get the suggestions. The query is pretty simple. It's just searching for activities with names similar to what's put in the text field, and then sorting it by the start date in descending order. After I had the suggestions, I just displayed them to the user, and when one was pressed, I updated the text field with that selected suggestion. Both the query and the code for displaying the suggestions to the user that I got from ChatGPT left just a little to be desired. For the query, there were just a couple tweaks that I wanted to make. One, limit the results to just 5. Change from starts with to contains for the name in the text field. And then the sort by was also something that I added. Displaying the suggestions needed quite a bit more attention. It was just displaying a list below the text field. Not pretty at all. I came up with an idea to display them as buttons in a wrapping H stack. Unfortunately, I was set on that plan before I realized how complicated it was to implement. I spent some time by myself trying to figure out how to do it with the help of ChatGPT, but between less than ideal suggestions and my inability to connect the dots, I was unable to bring that design to life. So I went a different direction, and I thought that this had to be something that's been implemented by someone before, and I was right. There's a dependency I could pull in called wrapping HStack, who knew, that I could pull in and use. It handles all the calculations for determining which view needs to be pushed to the next line, and then updates the offsets to display those options correctly. That would have been asking a lot of myself to figure out. I can't even really decide why I feel this way, but it feels like I'm doing something wrong or cheating or something when I pull in a dependency. In my head, I'm thinking that these are my apps, so I should be writing all the code, but it's just so much more efficient to pull in a dependency, especially for something like this that's just a layout help. I don't want to be pulling in a bunch of dependencies, but a handful for an app seems completely reasonable. So after those tweaks, I was really liking how it was looking, but I started to notice an odd behavior that I had to figure out. Whenever I would click on any one of the buttons, it would press all of the buttons and run their button action. So what ended up happening was the last button was running last and updating the text field with its value. So no matter which button I pushed, the last value always was set to the text field. I couldn't figure out why this was happening, and then I happened to stumble upon a comment somewhere that said there's some bug with the for each view that was causing this problem. Luckily, there's a very simple fix. It's just adding a borderless button style to the button, and then it all worked just perfectly. Whatever. Finally, it was looking and behaving the way I had envisioned. The user starts to type in the name and are given suggestions based on their previous activity names. That way they can keep creating activities with the same name without having to remember the names and entering them perfectly. This could also help me in the future if I ever want to group the activities by name for doing some kind of reporting or something. It doesn't look like I've added a whole lot of code this week, but each one of these features that I worked on took a lot of planning and research to find a solution. Once I had the solution and came up with a way to implement that solution, it ended up not being much of a code change. If I were to judge the success of this week based purely on the number of lines of code that I changed, I might be pretty disappointed. But honestly, looking at Ticker and seeing the improvements that I made makes me really excited. And I honestly can't wait to do more. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.